This is a graph of every single game award since the first one in 2014. These bars represent the time in minutes spent on the actual awards themselves. And this is the amount of minutes spent on ads. Hey there, I'm Ben Show, and today I want to talk about the Game Awards, the Oscars of video games, an award show owned and operated and hosted by the Pope, Jeff Keighley. Though it is an award show, it's known more for moments like this.
Nominate this award to my Reformed Orthodox Rabbi Bill Clinton. Thank you, everybody.
Or this.
Great work, Hydrobot. Can I? Ow.
Than the actual awards. Historically, in fact, the time it did focus more on the awards, which were mostly by accident, it was met with backlash. So what is the Game Awards if it's barely about the awards? Well, you saw the graph. Right now, the Game Awards are commercials.
And congratulations to Intersloth later Among Us.
Now I'm getting paid cash with Atlas Earth. We have virtual land all across the globe. Across the globe. The next wave is digital, catch me on the way up. The glow up is visible, couple more. Watch mine gon' go up, it's about to go nuts. It's about to go nuts.
So let me get this straight.
Now, this isn't news, really. It'd be a safe guess that most of you watching this have watched at least one Game Awards live stream or read or watched the countless other reviews or videos about how loaded with ads and commercials the event is, or how bad or annoying it is. And while I do plan on doing my fair share of complaining, I'm going to do something that those other videos don't. I'm going to defend them.
Yeah. These nerds are in no danger of getting laid anytime soon.
Before there were the Game Awards, there were the Spike Video Game Awards.
The VGAs!
I don't plan to go into too much detail about the VGAs, but I'll say this. It was the early 2000s, and TV back then was rough.
What do you guys know about anticipation? You don't mind having to wait? Or would you rather get what you want when you want it?
In the early 2000s, games were still squarely in the same camp in the public's perception as cartoons, junk food, and Nerf guns. Something that, while the kids were allowed to like them, no self-respecting adult should have anything to do with them. Unless, of course, it was somehow about sex. It wasn't until 2013 when they rebranded the VGAs to the VGX is when they pivoted away from a show with the Cyber Vixen of the Year award.
Cyber Vixen of the Year, Alex Vance.
To something resembling a prototype of what became Jeff Keighley's Game Awards. The VGX was bad for the opposite reason. It felt like a trade conference, making a complete 180 from the loud and flashy VGAs into a highly pared down and intimate series of conversations with dev and industry suits, sprinkled with nonchalant award presentations and game trailers.
With this, I know you guys are working hard on the game coming out in February. So tell us a bit about this.
Sorry.
A barrel fell. Stunk dog.
With the VGX receiving mixed reviews, Spike TV decided to can its award show altogether. So Jeff Keighley decided to go independent and hosted his own show, the Game Awards, in 2014.
Amazing energy. You know, this is a different kind of show for me. It's going to be a little bit like E3, a little bit like an awards show, but a lot about celebrating games and the incredible game developers that have made some amazing games this year in 2014. And also,
Jeff Keighley has seemingly always been talking about video games, being nepo-babied into the industry with his father and former CQO of IMAX, landing him a job in the first video game award show, Cybermania '94, writing the announcement speeches for William Shatner, later on working several freelance journalist jobs with G4 TV and Kotaku, eventually in 2003 landing the job as the host of Game Trailers TV on Spike TV.
Tonight, it's the premiere of Game Trailers TV, and I'm locked and loaded with a world exclusive bigger than the blast radius from an ion cannon.
And remained the host for 10 years, till 2013. So speaking purely from observation, it makes sense why the Game Awards are so full of trailers to begin with. Jeff Keighley is the trailers guy. They threw him in the game trailer gravity chamber, and he came out 7 feet tall saying stuff like,
Out of fuel. Great, man. Awesome. We'll look around here, I guess.
Just looking into the history of Jeff Keighley and the Game Awards, it became very obvious to me that it has always been a commercial show, with the awards being a supplementary bonus. But after watching through literally every Game Awards, I've noticed at the very least, they used to give the developers and creatives behind the game a little more respect and love. But as the show has grown in both size and prestige, developer presence has waned in favor of celebrity cameos or extended commercial slots for games that fall conveniently under the umbrella of the Game Awards Advisory Board, which I'll go into more detail with later on in the video. However, despite all these concerning evolutions over the years, the fact of the matter is the Game Awards have never been more successful. So what do I think the problem is? Is it the overbearing commercial presence? Its disconnect from the game development community in favor of celebrity prestige? Jeff's obsession with the Muppets?
Not after Bora Bora.
And the answer is yes. Well, except for maybe the Muppets. I don't like it. I don't want to see Miss Piggy groping Jeff, but maybe that's just a me thing I need to work on. Anyways.
Wow. Will Smith just smacked the shit out of
The Oscars, the yearly award show for films that have been running for nearly a century. And while it has its occasional moments where it's less about the show and more about... It's garnered a respect and authority from the general public and film industry to the point where movies have been made purely to get an Oscar nomination. It's a desirable event. To get an Oscar permanently cements you in the film industry as worthy of praise. But can we say the same about the Game Awards? Look, I know, it's not a fair comparison. Movies have been around for much longer than video games, and the Oscars have nearly an 8-decade head start over the TGAs, but the Academy Awards are really the best parallel we have to the Game Awards. Maybe not in terms of reverence and prestige, but at the very least, numbers. The Game Awards has broken its total viewership record every year since its conception, hitting a record 171 million views in 2025. Myself, along with my friends and others, have dismissed the Game Awards, making statements like it's pointless or who cares. But we have to face the reality that the Game Awards are a big deal. If your game is shown at the Game Awards, people follow it. If it wins Game of the Year, its purchases skyrocket. But why is it, with so much success every year, people seem to get more and more bitter? Many say it's the incessant ads, and when I first started researching this video, that was my opinion going in. But as I went through the archive, my opinion changed. When I started working on this, I imagined what I thought would be the ideal Game Awards. Half the ads, all put at the front half of the show, with the entire back half being dedicated to the awards. But as I watched the first couple years of the Game Awards, the years with the most balance between commercials and awards, I'll admit, I was a little bored. Conceptually, it was great. Jeff had tons of one-on-one interviews with developers, people actually working on the games being shown would announce their trailers, and it was cut and dry for the most part when there was a commercial or an award. This was one of Jeff Keighley's first ventures streaming a show online, and having come from a broadcast background, the show was run like a TV show, with an even amount of time spent between performances, commercials, and awards. However, it was better in concept than execution. The presenters, who were mostly developers, had little to no media training. Their acceptance speeches and interviews were meandering and drawn out.
Tonight, our dedicated team is proud to bring you an exclusive look at the next installment of this exciting franchise.
Commercials were just senseless strings of trailers back to back. Overall, it was just generally uninteresting. At the same time, if the solution was to put more emphasis on the commercials, then there wouldn't be such backlash every year, because that's exactly what they're doing. You saw a bit of these graphs briefly. Let me now break down exactly what you're seeing here. I watched every single Game Award. I tracked minute by minute how much time was spent on the commercials and how much time was spent on the awards and performances. I created an additional category for segments that straddled the line between both, like if an award was sponsored by a company or a musical performance was preceding a trailer for a game not nominated for an award, or something unrelated altogether, like the 13 minutes spent giving Hideo Kojima an award he won last year, leading directly into a trailer for his next game. I then took those segments, grouped them together for each Game Award, and calculated the percentage of time spent in those categories. And it's pretty clear there's been a decrease of time spent on the award or unsponsored performances and an increase in commercial time. And just to clear away some doubt, yes, the Game Awards have been getting longer every year, so you could be thinking to yourself, well, they may still be spending the same amount of time on awards, but just have more commercials. But that would be incorrect. In the first year of the Game Awards, roughly 86 minutes were dedicated to the awards themselves. And each year, the amount of time has trended downwards, with 2018 and a few other years getting close to the original 86 minutes, but never reaching that mark again. If I were to be generous and include the portions that were simultaneously ads, it doesn't affect the downward trend. It only shortens the gaps a little bit. So with this research done, you'd think there'd be a cut and dry problem, like a solution could be derived from it. but unfortunately, I have to come clean with you. I've been researching and writing this video since the 2025 Game Awards, and though I've collected so much information and tried to pin down the empirical binary truth of the Game Awards failure or a hint of its inevitable downfall, the honest truth is it's actually doing better than ever. I mean, it's a commercial success. It's made Jeff Keighley a very wealthy man, but it leaves a bad taste in my mouth every year. It's unfortunately cringe to admit, but the problem is less of a physical one and more of a spiritual one. Overall, the GAs feel like a hollow, empty shell. I mean, right now it's less than an award show and more an ambiguous video games exist show. Comparing it once again to the Oscars, though, there are commercials, 2025's Oscars in particular taking up about an hour of the 4-hour total runtime. 75% of the show is dedicated to the movies in each category, with performances and entertainment catered to the films at the awards show. While with the Game Awards, it's different every year. Intentionally, to some degree, according to Jeff Keighley himself, more on that later, but it's just never focused. It's always mixed, chaotic. So the issue is just that. It's the ambiguous here's video game show. It lacks clarity or real purpose. All these eyes on the largest game award show in the world, but all they see is a shell, a host body filled with the goals, desires, and wants of whoever can pay to be there or whoever can swoon Jeff into a free slot. The problem isn't the commercials or the awards. The problem is no one respects it.
I played it, and after you see this trailer, I think you're going to want to as well. Welcome to Highguard.
Now, I think making fun of Jeff Keighley and the Game Awards is an easy trap to fall into, and while I heavily disagree with much about how the Game Awards is presented, I don't harbor any bad blood with Jeff Keighley or the team responsible for the show. Gamer culture has never really been one you could be proud of being a part of. A lot of us are self-entitled, impatient, reactive, and love a good witch hunt. So I'm striving to be earnest and sympathetic in this video, and honestly all of my videos, because even though video games are just entertainment and on the outside looking in, hard to take too seriously, they really are complex creations, and it's an incredibly hard arena to predict what its fans will want, especially with the sheer volume and variety of games being made every year. So what the team at the Game Awards and Jeff Keighley seek to do is a monumental task, and I really do believe Jeff cares about how it's received. With that being said, I don't believe that excuses how they treat and operate the show. In an interview on the YouTube channel for The Game Business, a video games editorial, one I have to note is financially backed by Jeff Keighley, but, quote, remains editorially independent, at least according to their website. Jeff talks with the game industry insider Christopher Dring a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes of the TGAs and touches some of the subjects I've covered today. But what I want to draw attention to is more about what he says about the approach they take to running the Game Awards.
Something at this point in the show, this is the amount of time we should devote to musical acts. And is there a science to this?
No, there's no science. There are many different constituents that tune in. There are some people that would, like to see the show be all awards. Some people like to see it all announcements. And we sort of sit in the middle there, right? Where we kind of balance between the two sides. One year, I remember Summer Game Fest, people were upset that there were too many sci-fi games or something like that, right? Too many horror games. And we try and do our best, but also, the show, especially on the announcement side, is really a product of what's available, which games are being made. And you see all these lists of things people
The interview itself contains no real scathing takes or opinion on the game industry and the TGA's place within that. It's non-committal. Jeff seems simply content enough to be able to show what games are coming next and is overall pretty generalist about the industry as a whole. In fact, in each interview I read or watched, he plays it safe, at most once in a while calling attention to the faintest idea of the hot button topics of that year or month. And I think that this neutral, almost centrist viewpoint about the industry is what is slowly but surely poisoning the Game Award. The game industry is changing, and more games move away from the set ways of getting them into players' hands, in part because of the fall of physical media and the subsequent rise of digital licensing, also in part because of the decay of the AAA industry. But the truth is, it's not the same industry it was 11 years ago when the TGA started. Yet, the event itself has changed very little. Its growth feels wide more than tall. More ad time, bigger and fancier production, but ultimately saying very little. And what it looks like as a longtime lifetime viewer is like it's becoming more and more diluted. With the industry becoming faster, dynamic, and more guerrilla than ever, shouldn't the Game Awards Show of the Year reflect these changes? I think the Game Awards has the potential to become an event that not only people want to watch to see what's coming next in the game industry, but also an event that people trust and respect to reflect how the industry is or maybe should be going forward. Jeff, on occasion, steps out of his comfortable box of neutrality to flex the influence the TGAs have over the industry, some examples being the previously mentioned retroactive award for Hideo Kojima or his executive decision to show High Guard as the bookend trailer of 2025, which I will talk about in a moment. Imagine if those same decisions were made after careful and involved observation of the state of the industry instead of a singular personal interest. Imagine if the Game Awards were crafted in a way that really elevated the games of that year to the pedestal of high regard that Jeff seems to hold them to in his speeches every year at the beginning of each show.
This show reminds us why video games matter. They are worlds we share, stories we live, communities we build, and experiences that challenge, inspire, and connect us like nothing else.
I'm not saying the Game Awards needs to fundamentally change to improve. It just needs the focus. And here's how I think it could do it.
You are out of uniform, soldier! Where is your power armor? Don't have any? You expect me to believe that, maggot?
Okay, let's get one thing straight.
So let me get this straight.
I'm a moron. I'm just some guy who likes video games. And though I've liked video games my entire life, and maybe even helped make a few of them, I'm not an expert in any capacity to prepping and running an event of this magnitude. So these suggestions will be broad, and with only a loose understanding of the inner workings of the show. However, this entire video up until this point was made with the intent to set the stage and hopefully help inform my opinion going forward. I want the Game Awards to succeed, but not by just the metrics it's measured in now, but in something greater and maybe less tangible than a quarterly earnings report. It's easy to fall victim to the rhetoric spread by corporate sentiment that holds a majority of the world by the throat, that views and profit are the only markers of success. And I've found what holds stronger through the test of time is integrity and community. And that's what I want to define the Game Awards. Though early in their life cycle, video games are unquestionably a unique medium that deserves to stand next to art forms like music and film. While I don't believe they've quite earned the title of art yet, that's a topic for another video, I do believe they're well on their way. The global event that is the Game Awards could help foster and guide video games down the path of artistic respect that myself and I know so many of you know it deserves. And after all my research and healthy amount of time scratching my head going, here are a few key points I think could help place it in that position. This one is pretty straightforward. Stop it with the guest celebrities. I understand that it's a trend in higher budget studios to hire, mocap, and 3D scan a famous celebrity to be in your game. So when Keanu Reeves comes out to advertise Cyberpunk 2077, I can't make much of an argument when he's in the game. But when you have actors that come out that are at best tangentially related to a game of that year's award show, and at worst just purely there for cheap value gain, 9 times out of 10 they wander on the stage like an animal freshly released to the wild, and they always have something like this to say about video games.
In truth, I don't play a whole lot of video games.
If it weren't for Elijah, I'd still be playing Pong on an Atari.
I think I now have to go on the internet and try to figure out what I just watched, though. Yeah.
It's just embarrassing. Liking video games is embarrassing enough as it is. The last thing I need is to see an actor stumble on stage, half-ass a pre-written speech, and leave. There are celebrities and personalities within the gaming community that could be presenting these awards and making appearances that would outline and elevate prestige generated from within instead of having to borrow a universally recognizable face just to cater to everyone's urge to point at the screen and say, I know that guy. They will, on occasion, pull a member from the gaming community to present an award, but it's rare and often shelved in order to include as many movie or TV stars they can manage. There is room for these celebrity appearances to help highlight the achievements of the industry. The Harrison Ford cameo for the Indiana Jones game, while he also phones it in, at least acknowledges Troy Baker's contribution to the game.
Let's give a big round of applause to these two guys for the great circle. Thank you. I think this guy did a great job.
Or when the Last of Us showcast are paired with the game's voice cast to announce best performance.
So should we do this all together, just like Joel and Ellie's, just one and all?
Let's do it.
Time? Okay.
Okay. We're here to present the award for Best Action Game.
Many games have action, and these are the ones that truly kick ass.
This kicks ass.
It's clear these celebrities are all hired to only be a pretty face at the Game Awards and are most likely given very little direction, which would explain why most seem to not give a shit. While only a few more graceful guests try to use the opportunity to show respect to the teams and developers that actually deserve the spotlight. But it would elevate the event so much more if, at the very least, these celebs were paired with maybe a voice actor or a member of the dev team to contextualize their appearance a little bit.
What did I just tell you?
Let me preface this by saying I think the Game Awards already does a good job being transparent about many aspects of the show. They outline how the nominations and voting processes work. They provide all the list of companies involved with the nominees, and they're responsive to major issues and critiques about the event while showing an active desire to evolve. There is an aspect of the Game Awards that, however, remains a mystery: the advisory board. The advisory board, which involves many prominent figures and companies in the game industry, including Dr. Lisa Su, CEO of AMD, President of EA Laura Miele, the unknown amalgamation representatives from Epic Games, and the Apple from Apple. Now, I made a broad claim about the advisory board earlier in the video, correlating their involvement with the Game Awards to lengthy ad slots during the event. And yes, that is a wild assumption to make without proper information. But that's the issue. All the information we know about this advisory board is only what they put on their website. That they have no involvement with award nominees or winners, and that they, quote, help guide and advance the mission of the Game Awards. Now, an advisory board filled with all the bigwigs of an industry is nothing new. The Grammys and the Academy Awards have advisory boards as well, but the difference here is information. The Music Academy Advisory Committee has an entire website that breaks down exactly what they're responsible for. Mostly they handle the boring logistics of the award process, like determining how many and of what type of award there are each year, audits, investments, rules and regulations, and they even have a PDF you can download of their bylaws that detail every little thing the committee does. The Game Awards, however, does not. No, we are left with much to the imagination when it comes to the duties of this board. And while it's probably a safe bet that they're responsible for many of the things that these other advisory boards are also responsible for, I do find it concerning that for all the information and reassurances the GAs provide for the awards portion of their show, a portion we have established shrinks in representation every year, there is little to nothing about what goes into their other 80%. Well, most, if not all, people watching the Game Awards could give less than a shit about the bylaws. I believe in open book policy to the inner workings of this committee, and in addition, a better understanding on the commercial process of the Game Awards would help build a stronger foundation of trust. Because even if it is in fact just boring bureaucracy, it tells the average person that they have nothing to hide. And at its best, it allows a finer understanding, which leads to more constructive critique from those outside of the closed-off bubble of the Game Awards, which would ultimately aid in, quote, guiding and advancing the mission of the Game Awards.
Have some slice of that roast beef, please?
I'd be glad to carve you that. Thinner slices are more tender, though. Would that be all right?
I've watched a few interviews with Jeff Keighley about the Game Awards, trying to get to the core of what he believes its mission is, and I've gotten very little other than the incredibly broad statement of celebrating game. And I get it, it's an award show with commercials for upcoming games. The event in and of itself is a broad statement, but does it have to be? The video game industry is the largest entertainment industry in the world, with music and movies coming in at 29 and 30 billion in global revenue in 2024, and video games clearing their combined revenue by nearly quadruple with $182 billion. I know these industries are not measured the same way. Video games operating more like a toy economy, with a variety of variables including console sales, subscription fees, mobile games, and microtransactions. But the point I'm trying to get at is that the Game Awards has the luxury of choice when it comes to what they advertise during the event. But it seems, at least from what I've gathered from Jeff Keighley's press junkets, that they operate like freelancers, that they take whoever and whatever they can get whenever they can get it, and largely believe that it's out of their hands on what they can show.
Discovery problem for consumers to find them, and even for us as shows, as media people. It's like, how do you discover those? And yeah, we didn't world premiere Repo on the show last year. It would have been great if we did, but it's also like, it's one of those ones that, you know, I wasn't even aware of that game until it came out, right? And then it kind of built attention. And that's part of it, is the traditional, you know, PR marketing cycle for games. I always say, like, there is no playbook anymore. There's, you know, so many different paths to sort of success, and we can be an ingredient in that for some people, but for a lot of other games, they can go direct to consumer. If you have a great game, you know, build attention and anticipation.
While Jeff makes a valid point here that direct to consumer marketing is an increasingly more popular method of selling games in a world connected more than ever by the internet, I believe for that exact same reason that the Game Awards needs to be more selective and intentional in what they choose to showcase, because leaving it up to whatever that year provides gives us situations like this.
We got to be real, and we can't ignore the headlines that are out there. Game creators need to be supported by the companies that employ them. I think we all agree with that. So let me just say this before we get to any of the news or announcements or awards. We should not and will not tolerate any abuse, harassment, and predatory practices by anyone. Wow, Diablo 4 and Halsey are just getting started.
In case you're not familiar or don't remember, back in 2021, several whistleblowers from Blizzard, particularly their Overwatch team, exposed to the public that not only were the work conditions at Blizzard brutal and unhealthy, that also executive members of the team were habitually sexually harassing their employees. It started a chain reaction of other people in the industry confessing that they too were victims of abuse, and that it ran pretty rampant in the industry as a whole. The Game Awards rarely makes comments on issues of the industry it praises, but that year the allegations were simply too drastic to ignore, and they bravely and heroically made a non-committal general statement about workplace harassment during that year's Game Awards.
I think we all agree with that.
But since Jeff has a very special relationship with Daddy Warcraft, the statement left out any specific details, and the next year, in what I imagine was in some part an apology to this specific and continued member of the Game Awards Advisory Board, they had a 5-minute musical number performed by Halsey announcing Blizzard's new Diablo game.
Game creators need to be supported by the companies that employ them.
At best, this lack of awareness can be seen as ignorant and naive, and at worst, it can be seen as an intentional neglect. Now, I don't think the solution to this is for the Game Awards to get on their soapbox and make it their sole mission to fight injustice in the game industry, but at the very least have a backbone. It's painfully apparent that they're conflict adverse because of their relationship to nearly every single executive in the AAA game industry. If they were to have taken Blizzard off the ad reel for longer than 1 second and removed the CEO of Activision Blizzard from their advisory board, it would have sent a message to the community that they were considering the thoughts and feelings of the one singular entity that fuels the corporations the Game Awards was protecting, the audience. But instead, they gingerly sidestep the controversy like they've done countless times in order to maintain their corporate relationships while not stirring the pot enough to fully degrade their wavering relationship with their viewers. I believe the Game Awards needs a committee devoted to curating what commercials are shown. I'm sure they already have a marketing team of some sorts that handles acquisitions of ads and where they're going to slot them in the show, but it's been made apparent that if there is a planning committee, Jeff still has the final say. I mentioned Highguard earlier in the video when I brought up Jeff's occasional executive order. If you weren't aware, it's a free-to-play hero shooter released January 2026, and it was the final game shown at the 2025 Game Awards, a slot in the show notably reserved for the biggest reveals of the coming year. And while Jeff set the stage for its reveal to be a big one.
And so tonight, you're not only going to get the announcement of the game, but also your first look at the gameplay. I've played it, and after you see this trailer, I think you're going to want to as well. Welcome to Highguard.
Within the same show that had trailers featuring real people floating in the air or live orchestra performances, what we were given was more of a trailer you'd see during a commercial break. Highguard, since it came out, has not done very well. I could make a whole video on High Guard, its release, reception, and reveal, but for this one, I bring it up for one specific reason. The trailer was shown at the end purely because Jeff wanted it to be.
High Guard did not, in fact, pay for its infamous Game Awards finale slot. He says 2 separate sources have told me that High Guard did not have to pay for that hugely coveted spot at all. Reportedly, showrunner Jeff Keighley just really liked the game and offered it to them.
This isn't the first time Jeff has made the executive decision to thrust something to the spotlight during the Game Awards. The year after his best friend Hideo Kojima was not able to fly to the Game Awards to accept an award for Metal Gear Solid 5, Jeff Keighley made a point to personally hand it to him at that year's Game Awards. While a kind gesture, one he clearly only reserves to people close to him and are members of the advisory board. The GAs need a committee to hold Jeff Keighley accountable for his actions. He can't go around saying that the show is at the mercy of the market while also on a whim trying to single-handedly play trendsetter, because Jeff Keighley is anything but a trendsetter. If anything, he's a trend chaser. With over 20 years of working squarely within the business sector of gaming, his tastes and preferences are informed by the same metrics the corporations he's worked closely with are informed by. Numbers on a graph. And while yes, first-person competitive team-based shooters with a free-to-play model and a battle pass are some of the highest performing video games year to date, they hardly encompass the vastness that is the entire video game market. And using executive power to showcase this singular drop in the gaming bucket on a show that is supposed to be a celebration of all games only serves to hurt the image and credibility of the Game Awards in the eye of its audience. I mean, 5 minutes before the final trailer was shown, Capcom announced its first new mainline Mega Man game since 2018. Can you imagine how much more impactful it would have been for that to be the final trailer of the night instead of Overwatch 3 or Overwatch 2?
Get out of my house, my boy ain't much, but he's all I got.
Oh, Jeff. I can't quit you, Jeff. I tried my best to make this video as honest and informed as I could, but the truth is, I know it's a mess. When I started working on this video in December, I was confident I had all the answers. I didn't want to make yet another The Game Awards Sucks video. I wanted to at least try and find a way to push the conversation into something constructive, and while I tried my best, I ran into many roadblocks on the way. I reached out to several people and media outlets related to the Game Awards, including the info email on the Game Awards website itself, but they don't want anything to do with a whelp like me. I was hoping to get more insight on what really goes into making the Game Awards every year, but it's been made clear to me that they intend to stay as vague as possible, likely to protect themselves from the largely ignorant and easily insulted people that are a majority of the gaming community, but I'm sure it's also to shelter themselves from any real criticism, and who could blame them? They're making millions every year. So as far as Jeff Keighley and the board of advisors is concerned, everything is going according to plan. But like many things in this world we've crafted for ourselves, is it so bad to want something more than a bunch of fucking money? It seems like we're so frequently encouraged to believe that everything is out of our control, that if we can't solve a problem right away, we're expected to give up and move on, because why waste the effort? But the reality is we need to be having these sort of conversations. We need to be finding better ways, even if it's something as inconsequential as video games. Because questioning our surroundings and critiquing our systems is how we change. It's how we improve. I'm sure there's a much more wholesome, genuine, and considerate way to run a video game award show. I'm sure there's one out there right now trying to do exactly that. But the reality is the Game Awards is the biggest, most influential one, and it's not like it's the worst thing ever. It's just disappointing and a little sad to watch each year, but not unsalvageable. If there is an off chance this video somehow makes it to you, Jeff, and you've made it this far, consider this my official plea. You need to take a real stance. You've been in the trenches of this community for nearly 20 years. I know you've seen the worst that it has to offer, but I also know you've seen the best too, because otherwise, what would you be doing all this for? The Game Awards have the making of something that could become a cornerstone of video games forever, and I'm not kidding. But you need to let go. You need to rekindle your trust in the community that you dedicated half your life to and wants to trust you. But it's not going to happen if you can't open yourself up to the possibility that the gaming community, its people, and its culture is changing. And the Game Awards needs to change as well.